Hi, I'm Peter Bergler. I'm the lead program manager with the Terminal Services Group at Microsoft. I want to talk to you today about terminal services, what we've done in the past, but particularly the new features that we've added for terminal services in Windows 2000. We've added some really cool stuff that I think is going to make it a lot easier to use the product and make it applicable in a variety of environments. Particularly, I'm going to talk first a little bit about what terminal services is. Don't want to spend a lot of time on that. I think most of you folks have used it before or been exposed to it and get the general concepts. Mostly, I'm going to focus on what we've done new in terminal services for Windows 2000, some of the very late additions. In fact, even if you've used Beta 3, we've added some great new features since then that you'll want to know about. Then I'm going to talk some about deploying terminal services, particularly the issues and pointers that you might want to think about as you're creating new environments or building a new infrastructure or upgrading your existing infrastructures into the terminal services for Windows 2000 arena. I'm going to go through some scenarios there to show you exactly how you might lay that out and talk about some of the configurations that matter. So what is Terminal Server? Terminal Server is meant to bring the latest Windows applications to a variety of platforms, platforms that normally might not have been able to run Windows-based applications. For example, you might be wanting to run Office 2000, but you've got a lot of legacy 486 machines or Unix machines or things like that in your environment. Terminal Services allows you to do that by running a thin client on each of these various devices and letting those connect back to a server running Windows 2000 that will process all the applications centrally for you. This can also be used to centralize application management. You have an ability here, whether because you want to update your application frequently, have issues about deploying it, or have remote users who want to connect into it who are mobile, who are moving around, or might have small devices that they carry with them. Gives you the ability to do that and run your application on this central server. How it works is very simple. It's sort of standing the typical network data model on its head. Instead of the usual model where your PC serves up the human interface and connects out through the network for its data needs, we're doing it the other way around. We're serving up the human interface needs across the network. The screen, the keyboard, the mouse movements are going back and forth between the application server, the terminal server running on Windows 2000, and the thin client, wherever that might be, whether it's on a Windows 2000 device or whether it's on a CE device or anything like that. Those are going up and down there. Of course, the network is still being used to access centralized data stores, SQL, and things like that. But predominantly, we're communicating with the client through that pipe now as well. It's really a very simple concept. In many ways, it harkens back to earlier days of shared resource computing, of time sharing, and that sort of thing. The enormous difference here is we're doing this with a GUI interface and with today's technologies. There's a couple of different ways that people are using terminal services. The big separation is between remote administration and application serving. Under remote administration, you're using terminal services to provide a mechanism to get in and run on your server. This might be used to manage servers across forests or from remote locations, things of that nature. The other usage is for application serving, where you're deploying your applications on a central server and allowing your clients to come in and connect to them. Variety of reasons for doing this, as we talked about, and a variety of clients that will connect to it. For Microsoft, you see clients coming on all of our current Windows platforms, Windows NT, Windows 2000, Windows 95, and 9X, including some of our older Windows platforms, 16-bit Windows, like Windows for Workgroups. We also have clients running on Windows CE on the handheld Pro devices and CE-based, Windows-based terminals. These terminals are replacing the sort of green screens that we've seen in the past and upgrading them to still low-cost, highly manageable devices, but now providing a graphical user interface as well. So that's sort of what terminal service has been. Terminal service has been around since NT4. In NT4, it was a separate product that was released as NT4 Terminal Server Edition. That's no longer true. In fact, as we now move into what we're doing for Windows 2000, you see that the first and probably biggest new feature that we're adding is integration into the kernel. We're now part of the core OS. This gives us a variety of big wins. Single binary kernel, unified service packs. You can use one service pack that upgrades any Windows 2000 requirements in the future, not a separate one for Windows 2000 and terminal server. It's all been combined now. Also, better performance and scalability. Since we're right in there with the kernel, we have better resource management, things of that nature. And it's very easy to add. Not a special install or having to do a clean install. It's simply a checkbox in the Add Remove programs, just like any other service. We also get to leverage now the multilingual capabilities under Windows 2000. This is really great because it means a single terminal server can serve up applications to a variety of customers in different languages without having to have different servers in different locales. This is done simply by loading the appropriate language pack under Windows 2000. When the user connects under terminal server will detect their language settings in their profile and serve them up the correct language for them. We've expanded our DCOM support. Under NT4, that was somewhat limited. Now, because we're part of the kernel, we can easily provide accommodation for all the different kinds of DCOM activation. And adjustable scheduling, so that you get the ability to set your server to run with either server mode or application mode, as we call it, depending upon how it does its time slicing to favor the kind of usage that you put it to. Still more features that we've added to it, particularly outside of the terminal server kernel requirements, but now within the protocol itself. Printer redirection is very helpful. What this means is when you connect to a client that has local printing, we'll detect that that printer is there and automatically make that the default printer. So even though an application off on some server somewhere is instigating the print request, we know to route that to the printer that's located where the user is located. Session remote control is great help for help desk capabilities. What this means is that when you're on the terminal server as an administrator, you can connect to somebody else's session, see exactly what they're seeing, type with them, mouse with them, all of that stuff. The great scenario for this is, I call the help desk and say, I'm trying to use Word and I don't know how to do my grammar checking. I don't know what this means. How do I do that? Well, I can now connect to your service with you and just show you. Here, pull down over here, click on this, and you're just watching on the same screen. It's incredibly powerful. Another feature we've added here is clipboard redirection. This simply means that the intelligence on your client and the intelligence on the server can exchange information with each other. So I can cut something that's sitting on a folder on the server and paste it on my client side, and that's copied directly over for you. In what we ship directly in Windows 2000, this would work for most cut and paste capabilities. We extend that, in fact, through the resource pack with facilities to even allow you to do high bandwidth cut and paste of files and folders and that sort of thing. Moving on, we've added, as I mentioned, a new client, HPC Pro. This means that some of your very small, lightweight devices can now give a full Windows 2000 experience simply by connecting into a terminal server. So I can have my local capabilities of my HPC for my highly portable environment, but when I can connect in, I can have my full desktop available to me. We've also spent a great deal of time improving the performance of both the protocol and the server. In particular, we've really tuned up the way the bitmap caching is working and added some client-side caching, and overall just picked up our performance to where we feel we're competitive with any protocol that's out there for this capability. In fact, in every single benchmark we're running now in our test labs, we're beating out the competition on that. Finally, what we've done is to add virtual channel support. Virtual channel support lets you take the capabilities of the communications infrastructure that Windows 2000 provides under terminal server and leverage that to do additional things. Things that might be specific to your application, things that we may not have gotten to yet, like audio redirection or port redirection. This is a very simple approach, really. The way that this works is you go ahead and deploy a piece of code on the client side, a DLL, that registers and says, I'd like to use the channel. When the connection is created, the server will see that that request is there and make that available on the terminal server side. So that when you deploy an application on the terminal server side, it will look and see that the channel is available using essentially a named pipe kind of concept and be able to communicate directly with your piece of code on the client side. So, this could be leveraged to do things like speak to point-of-sale devices like a barcode reader, potentially audio redirection, things like that. We've added a couple of new features since Beta 3, a couple of which are very powerful that I want to talk about. So if you've been using the product in Beta 3, these are things that are going to be new even to you. There are two that are very important: remote administration and license management. I'll go into those in a second into some detail. A couple of other things that we've done is to work with the MSI group to make sure that you can now do MSI integration with terminal server and publish your application to a terminal server. This means that you can package things up, publish them out there, and the administrator on the terminal server will find them and be able to install them for use by terminal server clients. We've also added this install pop-up. If you've used Terminal Server before, you know that there's a special installation mode that you need to worry about. This is so that we can manage the registry and the user per user data files and that sort of thing, make sure that all the right things are done there in this multi-user environment. In order to get that, you either have to use the command line or more often the add remove programs dialog to add your program so that things are done right. If you don't do that, in the past it would just install wrong and not work right. We've added this pop-up that will come up if you try and just run setup without being in install mode or without using the add remove programs and stop you from doing that. So that makes it a safer for people who are trying to do this. So let me talk now about remote administration, one of the big features that we've added since Beta 3. Remote administration actually separates the use of terminal server into two very distinct modes: the full terminal server, which we call application serving, and remote administration. When you go to install, you're asked which mode you want to install in. Remote administration is sort of a lightweight version of terminal services. This is meant to allow you to deploy terminal services on mission-critical servers and use its capabilities to go ahead and administer that server from a remote location. You might want to do this for a number of reasons. Perhaps you want the ability when your pager goes off for your operator at 3 in the morning for them to remote in from home and run as if they were sitting there at the console. That's a very helpful thing. But because terminal server creates this link over any IP pipe to give you this sitting at the terminal kind of experience, by using remote administration, you can also use this to administer cross domains, cross farms, even to remote locations from a single operation center. So there's a variety of ways to do this. In deploying this feature, we've done a few things. Probably the biggest one is to remove all the heavyweight parts of terminal services that are in there for application management, multiple user management, and that sort of thing. Remote administration is not meant as a multi-user environment, rather as this remote connection environment. It does support up to 2 simultaneous remote administration connections in addition to the console session. There's no special licensing requirements, nothing like that, just the ability to call in and do this. Even though it supports 2 at the same time, we don't recommend that many users come on and try and access the administration mode. If you've got a few people on there, perhaps they're doing that to collaborate on something, but you can see the problems of 2 people trying to do defrags at the same time. So you should watch and see who else is on. It's meant for remote access, though. It's very powerful for that. We pulled out all those pieces, all those checks, and all that management to keep this really lightweight. And as a result, we're using very little memory, very little processor to provide this enormously powerful feature. By default, administrators are the only ones who can come in and connect to this. That security is manageable by you, as is the scheduling for your background services. So that remote administration is something that we've had a lot of requests for, both internally, like from our back office group, and from many of our clients. We're getting quite a bit of use from this, even already in our own Microsoft ITG group. The other big feature that we've added is license management. License management is a set of features that allows you to accurately account for your terminal service licenses and ensure that you're complying with the license agreements. Everything is properly licensed on your system. This is a great tool for MIS directors who are trying to keep count of what's going where and to work with their licensing programs and make sure that they're kept current on that. It helps you make sure that you've got the right number of licenses for your environment, not too many and certainly not too few. The way that this works is essentially through a 3-tier system. There's the terminal server itself, there's a licensing service, and then there's a clearinghouse. The licensing service is probably the key part of this. This is a service that runs in your environment. It needs to be deployed in a discoverable pace, either on a peer in a workgroup or on a domain controller. What it does is to store and distribute the client access licenses to the terminal servers on an as-needed basis. The terminal server will come to the license service and ask it for a license anytime an unlicensed client tries to connect to it. Now, there's a variety of grace periods in management here. If a terminal server can't find a licensed service when it first comes up, it has 90 days in which it will run and still allow clients to connect before it would find a licensed service. After that 90 days, a client either needs to be fully licensed or a licensed service needs to be available. If a licensed service runs out of licenses, it can still issue a temporary license to an unlicensed client. That temporary license allows that client to connect for 90 days until a real license can come along. That real license will come along because the licensed service has been connected back to the clearinghouse and a purchase has been made. That purchase can be made through a variety of channels. It can be done using your Select or your Open program, or it can be done through your traditional retail channels where you'll buy a client access pack and then just feed the code into the license service for validation by the clearinghouse. So overall, this is meant to provide a great deal of security and management throughout the terminal services environment. This service is used right now only for the terminal server client access licenses. As we mentioned, it's not required at all for remote administration mode, only when you're doing actual application sharing. We've put a bunch of things also into the resource kit that will be helpful for you moving forward. We put some management tools in there which have to do with session monitoring and license reporting. The license reporting piece works with the license service to allow you to generate out reports of how many licenses are available, what's been used and by whom, that sort of thing. Usability tools, as I mentioned, one of them allows you to extend the common clipboard paradigm to include file transfer and larger capabilities like that. We've also added a tool to automatically do drive sharing. Typically, if you want your client drives to be available to the server applications that a terminal service client is connecting to, you would need to do the net share and net use on both sides to make that happen. This utility will do that automatically for you so that you always see your local drives. We've added some performance testing tools that will help you do sizing validations in your environment. They're highly scriptable tools that will simulate stress load and can do so with your own applications. And finally, we've added some configuration tools, things that help you set up your environment in a much more controllable fashion. This includes things that would limit which client versions can connect to your system, that will help you configure your client, and a very powerful tool called Application Security, which lets you set just which applications can be run on a file-by-file basis for your users on a terminal server. There was a tool like this as well in Terminal Server 4. You may be familiar with that. If you've used that one, this enhances it for Windows 2000, and in particular has added a Learn mode so that you can just turn on the tool in Learn mode, run the applications as an administrator that you want your users to have access to, and it will record all the files that they should have access to and lock down to just those files and no others. I want to talk a little bit about the scalability work we did. I mentioned that we've done some work to improve the servers and the scalability. Well, we've really managed to grow a good, probably 20% better, 15 to 20% better than what we were doing under Terminal Server 4. We're still doing a bunch of this work. We're still doing a bunch of tweaking, so these numbers should be considered quite preliminary. Hopefully we'll do better, but who knows what will happen in the kernel moving forward between now and RTM. We've been testing under basically two different scenarios. We call them knowledge worker and structured worker. These are both sort of typical office worker, the knowledge worker being the one that's doing a bunch of different things all at the same time. I'm browsing and I open an email and then I open Exchange and paste something into the email from it and that sort of thing, versus a structured task worker who does one thing at a time. Maybe they're a claims adjuster and they just run their spreadsheet and then move on and do the email and then go back to the next client and that sort of thing. So using those kinds of approaches, we've got some numbers here that you can see on a sort of 4 processor, 4 gigabyte, 400 megahertz, or 444 systems. We're seeing about 120 knowledge workers being able to run on that sort of system, and a little bit less with the structured task workers. The scalability, you can see, also changes with the amount of memory. We've been doing some work there. We're still doing a lot more work here, so again, consider these numbers preliminary, but just to give you an idea of the kinds of scalability that we're seeing. You also might want to look at specifically how we compare with Terminal Server 4. What we've seen there is that in the lower numbers of users, we tend to be competitive, maybe a little bit better, but as that number increases, we just get better and better. By the time you're putting 70 and up users on your system, the Terminal Server, the Windows 2000 numbers are just really peaking out. What you're seeing on this graph is how long a particular activity takes. So these shorter bars for Windows 2000 are showing that we're actually doing better. So that's what we've added in Windows 2000 for terminal services. Those are some great improvements that I think that we've made. I'm going to talk a little bit now about some things to think about as you deploy terminal services. I'm going to talk a little bit about focusing on the usage that you want to make. Then I'm going to talk about the permissions and policy issues that you would want to think about, and then a little bit about application deployment and how that's evolved. We sort of think about three different kinds of use for terminal server. One is the remote administration mode. We've talked a bit about that. Then there's line of business applications and remote desktop. Both of the line of business application and remote desktop modes fall into the application serving environment, as opposed to remote admin, which is obviously administering your remote servers. We separate the line of business and remote desktop into essentially a focused kind of single-use application. I'm using this for my point-of-sale application or my warehouse application, where people will connect in, do a particular task, and then go on to something else, running that same application over and over again. The remote desktop application is more like serving up the full Windows 2000 experience. I'm giving you the desktop. There may be many different applications on there. You can run anything that you want to. So you need to think about how you separate that, and I'll talk in a minute about different deployments to manage different things there. When you're doing that, you want to think about the permissions that people have. One big issue to keep in mind is that in order to use terminal services at all, users must be able to log in locally. The whole experience of terminal services is meant to be just as if you're logged onto that machine, so you have to have permission to do it. By default, we sort of set that up for you. When you have remote administration mode set in, all administrators have the ability to do that by default. When you're running an application serving mode, your default setup lets all users in your domain in. This is because terminal server lets all users on the machine in, and by default, Windows 2000 puts all domain users into the users group on any given machine. You can obviously change that. You can change that by going in and changing your user group settings, or by going directly into the terminal server permissions and setting up who has permissions to use terminal services. You also need to think about the user and group access tools that you want to make use of here. We have our tools on Windows 2000 that lets you configure this. You can set up the users and groups that have access there in any way that you want to. I mentioned what the defaults are, but you have the ability to change that around. So those permissions are important to make sure that. We get a lot of people who set that up wrong and then don't get how people are not able to log in, or the wrong people are able to log in. Under Windows 2000, there's been a lot of discussion on the policy and profile advancements that we've made. So I want to talk a little bit about how that applies to terminal services. One thing that I mentioned earlier is that you can use Windows Installer to deploy your per machine applications. Now, that's per machine, not per user. The MSI packaging and the IntelliMirror capabilities don't apply to the per user usage at this point, which is probably the right thing to do. In a terminal services environment, you're running on a machine that's meant to support often many, many people. It would be cumbersome at best if people are allowed to go in and make major changes to that machine. So the usual usage is to figure out the applications that you want to have shared there, put those on by the administrator and lock those down, and then allow people to use them. This does have some implications for things like on-demand installation, which is generally disabled here, so that you don't have the ability to add additional language packs or add additional Office features. Those need to be configured up front by the administrator. You also need to keep in mind, though, that when you set things up, some of your policies that you arrange on the terminal services machine might be overridden by group policy. So it's important to make sure that those two things are in sync. You also want to watch out for setting up to remove unmanaged application configurations. If you set this up, you may find yourself in a situation where suddenly all of your applications get removed because the policy realizes that it can't manage applications under terminal services, and you have to reinstall and start all over again. So that's meant to avoid on terminal services. The general recommendation for managing your policy under terminal services is to separate all your terminal services machines into a separate OU. This allows you to set up the right kind of policy for a terminal services machine. You can do things like use loopback and set lower levels of permissions or different levels of permissions for the users when they're logged on there. Perhaps if you're using terminal services as a security entrance mechanism and things like that. But by putting them all in a single OU, you can administer them that way and not have to worry in a more general environment, while I'm writing a policy, how will it apply on one machine versus another. Think of it in that way, sort of the same way as you think of your domain controllers. Obviously, you want those administered differently, so you separate them out into an OU. Same kind of thing with terminal services. When you go to install applications, there are a variety of things to keep in mind. First of all, any well-behaved Windows 2000 application will run well on terminal services. However, terminal services does tend to point up misbehaved applications much more quickly than other kinds of environments. This is because it is a multi-user environment. You're going to have multiple instances, multiple users. So applications that have memory leaks are going to be magnified when you're running 100 instances of them. Applications that don't do a good job of separating user data from common data are going to get pointed up when users are stepping all over each other. Or applications that write user configurations to HKLM instead of HKCU are going to wind up having users inherit each other's changes and profiles, which is not what you want. Now, we do have a variety of install scripts that help manage that problem by copying out registries or renaming directories to create an environment where things work. You should look on the Windows 2000 CD or on our website for things that will help you with that. You also need to remember when installing application to use the add remove wizard or to use the install mode using the command line and change user/install. Now, that's not true for remote administration mode. If you don't do this, we wouldn't be able to capture the right settings and manage the applications the right way, and very often they simply won't work and you'd have to remove them and reinstall. As I mentioned before, we've added a feature so there'll be a pop-up if you try and install without using one of those two things. It'll stop you, but you should still keep that in mind. So, a last point on that, if you add terminal services to an existing machine or remove it from an existing machine, your applications may well be installed wrong. If you add terminal services after you've, say, installed Office on your machine, Office will not have been installed in terminal services mode. It won't know that it's in terminal services, and terminal services won't know about its registry settings and the sorts of things that we need to replicate for the users. So you may well have to remove the application and then reinstall it in that situation. So those are some of the points to keep in mind. Let's look at how those apply to particular scenarios. I'm going to talk about 3 different scenarios which kind of correspond to what I was talking about for usage patterns: the line of business applications, the remote desktops, and remote administration. For line of business applications, you want to focus, you're talking about a focused application such as point of sale or data collection. The scenario I want to talk about here is particularly one where you've got a large number of users. These users are all going to be connecting into a farm of terminal services. So you want them to be able to come in, be routed, be load balanced, all that sort of thing without worrying too much about where they end up and things like that. Now, there's a couple of things that are important to think about in this kind of environment. What I'm saying is that the same approach here would apply to whatever application that they're getting. So the same application needs to be on all the different machines. And also I'm saying that they can go from one machine to another. So session state isn't real critical in this environment. You know, if I disconnect from machine A and connect to machine B, I'm not going to be in trouble because I left something behind. Now, this is specifically talking about line of business application, but the same approach would apply if you've got a group of such applications. Maybe there's a point of sale and a time tracking application that's used by a variety of users on a sales floor. I envision that looking something like this. You've got your couple of DCs up there, of course, and that's where your licensing would reside. Your clients connecting into this, and then a group of terminal services, some number of them. Now, one thing to note here is we've got a data cluster off on the side. This is where we're going to store our per user data, our user profiles, and perhaps even a SQL store for our line of business information, things like that. The important thing is that information is not on the terminal services. It's on a separate, clustered perhaps, or otherwise recoverable mechanism with its own failover and its own safeties. Then you've got the terminal services applications all running the same application or set of applications, and we're going to use NLB to balance between them. NLB is very powerful for this because it will allow us to do our load balancing without any complicated or expensive hardware. It's great in an environment like this where you have a fairly low state maintenance issue. It doesn't matter if I drop connection on one machine and move to another one, since all the data that I care about is over on that data cluster. So this would work really well. Um, what you would want to do in this environment, first of all, is use group policy to control the access, who can get in where, and what my settings are. Roaming profiles matter here if you want to have any kind of profile that stays with the user. Um, the applications can be published out through MSI to make installation easier. You also want to keep in mind to set disconnect from session through the terminal services configuration. This would allow the session to automatically be terminated if a user was to be disconnected because of a network failure or they turned off their machine or something like that. This keeps you from having a lot of dangling sessions left around. You might actually want to leave disconnected sessions on for a period, and you can configure that under terminal services, say maybe 10 minutes. This would allow me, using NLB's IP affinity controls, to connect the user back to a session in progress if it was just a temporary network outage. Okay. NLB, as I mentioned, is a powerful tool for working in this kind of environment with terminal services. Network load balancing is useful in large deployments for managing a bunch of terminal services with clients connecting into them. The thing to keep in mind is NLB's balancing is IP-oriented, not session-oriented. So it's very useful in a stateless environment like I've just described. It's useful for drop sessions like we talked about, and it can support disconnected sessions can support disconnects if the fixed IP is connected with the session. So if you've always got a static IP, NLB is also useful to get you back to the machine that you came from, even if it's more stateful. If you want true session-based load balancing, this would require an add-on product from a third party. But in most cases, this is going to do a great job of helping you out. But let's look at a much more stateful environment, a remote desktop application. Here what we're trying to do is provide a full desktop, varied applications, so that I, as a user, have the full Windows 2000 experience, whether when I'm roaming or whether on my down-level device, on a CE device, or even on a Unix machine. There's a variety of uses for this, but a key here is that session state matters. I'm going to be doing all the things on this that I would typically be doing on my desktop, editing Word documents, running Excel, browsing the web. If I were to start a Word document and walk away from that machine and then go connect from another machine or from another location, I'd like to be able to pick up where I left off. So there's a lot of state associated with that session. So the layout I think about for this kind of environment doesn't necessarily involve NLB. What you're seeing here is I'm taking clients and grouping them to specific servers. I still want to keep much of the data, perhaps even much of the user profile, on a centralized data store, not so much located on the terminal services. This allows the terminal services to scale better. But I am directing the users to a particular machine. This is one way to manage a more stateful reconnected client problem. So in this setting, again, you want to use group policy and roaming profiles to set up the way that the users are managed among the machines. You can, again, use application publishing, as we talked about. You can use NLB to load balance on a group of servers, but only in certain instances here. Those instances would include static IPs, or it would include instances where perhaps you would rather not maintain disconnected sessions for security or business or resource usage reasons, something like that. In any of those cases, you can just cluster them together as in the previous example, or you can, if you care about those things and want to have disconnected sessions, this is a way to do that. Now I want to talk a bit about remote administration and how to deploy that. Boy, nothing could be simpler. Just go onto your server, go into your Windows Add Remove Components dialog, and check the Terminal Services box. You then get asked by Terminal Services, well, did you want Remote Admin or did you want Application Serving Mode? You turn around and say, I want Remote Admin, you're done. This provides this very low, lightweight, very simple mechanism to now connect into your server from wherever you are on a variety of different clients. Keep in mind that this is going to come in over whatever TCP IP pipe that you've created, so you've got all the security and all the profiling and all the management of that around that TCP connection that you would normally have. That's all inherited by that, and the user still has to log in on the machine using their own credentials and getting their own permissions. So there's a high level of security involved with this as well. So that's about all I have to say. I think that gives a good overview of where we are with terminal services today. If you're looking for more information, I certainly direct you to our website at www.microsoft.com/ntserver and in the terminal server area. We're continuing to do our performance work, so those metrics that you saw are going to be improved, and we'll be posting some information about that on the website. as well as some Windows 2000 papers and some walkthroughs that will be available real soon. Thank you.